Chapter 2503 Arrival. Chapter 2503 Arrival. Ling Han nodded. Zhu Heng looked upon him highly, and that was why he had left behind this dimensional transfer seal. Just thinking, he knew that this kind of item definitely had to be very hard to create, or Zhu Heng would not have had limited the numbers in the past. Yet now, in a situation when he could not have confirmed Ling Han's life or death at all, he had still left this behind, which showed how high his opinion of Ling Han was. Ling Han received the transfer seal, and felt very rueful. In the next few days, he did not do much else, but simply spent time with his parents, brothers, and the others. After this, he would go to the transcendent dimension, and he really did not know how much time it would be until he could next return after this long journey. He naturally left behind all the Celestial King pills. When his parents, Feng Po-yun, and the others reached the peak stage of the ascending origin tier, they could use this pill to advance to the Celestial King tier, and truly gain an immortal lifespan. He also took out that great Celestial King tier rock for a barbecue. The violent aura within it had been refined by Ling Han, and it had become an extremely nutritious food. But even so, everyone could only take a small piece, or they would definitely die. The Celestial King tier bird had a lot of meat, and everyone would need several decades to be able to digest the benefits it contained after eating it once. Thus, it was enough for them to eat for several 100 million years. On the other side, Ling Han naturally was also increasing the might of his body art and the divine demon sword. After reaching the transcendent dimension, he would definitely be unable to use the regulations he had grasped now. He would need to start from the beginning again, but celestial techniques would not be affected. Thus, he had to improve his body art. This naturally needed a bit of time, but Ling Han was not concerned. In any case, he had already delayed for over 1 million years, so what would a few more years, or a few tens of thousands of years, hurt? Of course, when Ling Han had pushed his body art to the limit of his current cultivation level, this was already a matter of 20,000 years later. In terms of body art, his vitality index had broken through 9,000, which was completely enough to fight a 5th heaven celestial king. In fact, an ordinary peak stage 5th heaven celestial king would not even be a match for him. Even in the transcendent dimension, this kind of strength was completely capable of claiming a niche, right? Ling Han bade his parents and brothers farewell, and then activated the dimensional transfer seal while bringing the women with him. He poured in the mighty power of the Celestial King tier. Instantly, the jade seal flowed, dazzling the entire celestial realm. Then, a sphere of light wrapped around Ling Han and the others. Xiao, tearing open the celestial realm, it began traversing through countless realms. Wang, everyone felt light flashing madly in their eyes, and could not see anything at all. Pa, the clothes they were wearing were all ripped apart, and even spatial god tools were no exception. Aside from living beings, nothing would survive. In fact, even their hair was lost. It could not be helped. This was a transfer seal, and could only safely send them into the transcendent dimension, but there was no guarantee of anything else, unlike when Zhu Heng himself moving with the might of a heavenly venerable tier, in which case this kind of dimensional compression would naturally be no big deal. They all felt extremely terrible, as if they were mere mortals that had taken an extremely bumpy ride on a carriage, ending up feeling extremely nauseous. When they were just about at the limits of their tolerance, peng, space cracked apart, and they shot out like the scattered flowers from the hand of a celestial maiden. Ling Han was the fastest to react. Stretching out a hand and pressing down, he froze all the women in their movement. With a thought, source power turned into clothing, protecting his body. When one had reached a cultivation level like his, there was actually no need for clothes. Source power could manifest into anything, and it was more useful than anything else. Hair also grew immediately. His vitality was extremely strong, so this was no big deal. The women exchanged looks, and all felt slightly embarrassed. Though they were all Ling Han's beautiful wives, they had never appeared naked all at the same time. They, too, used origin power to form clothing as protection. Of course, their hair and eyebrows had to be grown at the first instant. They were shy, but prized beauty even more. Ling Han laughed loudly. This naturally caused the women to blush even harder, and they thought, could our husband be having some inappropriate thoughts? But this had truly wronged Ling Han. With a smile, he withdrew his gaze and looked around their surroundings. This was a swamp, and there was fog rising all around them. Even if he was a celestial king, he actually could not cast his sight to its full limits. He could only see around 5 kilometers around him. It should be known that his battle prowess was directly close to the peak stage of the 5th heaven celestial king tier. He could not see their surroundings clearly, and his divine sense was also restricted. Naturally, he would not dare to use his full speed. Otherwise, if he encountered any sudden situation, such as crashing into a powerful creature, wouldn't that be fun now? This was a transcendent dimension. Ling Han believed he would have no problem ensuring his own safety, but there was definitely no way he could do as he liked here. As expected of the transcendent dimension, taking me a notch down straight off the start, Ling Han said smilingly. They did not discern the direction, either. In any case, it would be useless even if they did. They just headed in a single direction, and were sure that they would definitely be able to walk out of this place with a straight course. As they traveled, everyone was adapting themselves. As expected, in a different dimension, the regulations would also be different. The regulations they had initially grasped could no longer be used. In this place, they would only be equivalent to the Genesis tier, and did not even have the ability to fly. Ling Han was no exception, either. However, his body art was too amazing. Was there any need for him to fly? A single leap was faster than the speed of the majority of celestial kings. Of course, he did not dare speed up at present. They did not stay idle, but were rather recultivating with the regulations of this place. As expected of a transcendent dimension, they soon formed a common understanding. In terms of number, the regulations here were not much different from the celestial realm. There was just an additional regulation of darkness and light, as well as 3 other regulations that Ling Han could not name as of yet. It could not be helped. He had never come into contact with these regulations, so how could he name them? But for the similar regulations of metal, this great Tao was much more complex and closer to its essence. This undoubtedly raised the difficulty level of cultivation, but the benefit was also extremely apparent. Because if they cultivated like this to 9th heaven, they would be even closer to the essence of heaven and earth, and would be able to grasp the power of heaven and earth more easily, and step into the heavenly venerable tier from there. No wonder 6th tier heavenly venerates could be nurtured here, or even 7th tier heavenly venerate. Ling Han created another spatial god tool, and then stowed all the women inside. This place was filled with unknown dangers, so it was best to be careful. If he was by himself, he could come and go as he pleased, which would greatly increase the safety level. He strolled onwards slowly. The swamp was enshrouded in fog, and there was a strange stickiness to the ground. His legs would at least be swallowed up to the knees with a single step, and if he could not exert force in time, it was possible that even his entire person would be sunken in. This was also why Ling Han did not allow the women to travel with him. It would affect their speed too much. The primary reason was because they had not grasped the regulations here yet, and naturally could not move the elements, and would thus be trapped by their circumstances. Thankfully, Ling Han's body art was too strong. With a light jump, he could leap through the skies. This swamp was very filthy and the water muddy and clouded, exuding a rank stench. When one lifted a foot, bubbles would emerge, as if countless bodies were buried beneath. The smell was really intoxicating. Even Ling Han found it slightly unbearable. He held a hand to his nose to avoid being attacked by this poisonous stench. The swamp was extremely huge. After walking for a day, there was still no sign that he was about to leave this swamp. He could not help but increase his speed, because he had also developed some understanding of this place after this one day and night. Setting aside the issue that it was hard to travel here, this was actually a plateau, and there was no sign of life. Peng, his feet exerted force, and his speed immediately began to spike. In a flash, another 3 days had passed. Ling Han rapidly raced forth, and suddenly felt like something black was barreling towards him. He hurriedly stepped on the brakes, but it was still too late. That black thing had crashed into him. Ling Han did not attack, because he instantly realized that this was a wild beast. However, it was only at the ascending origin tier, and there was no need for him to be concerned at all. Ling Han did not move in the slightest with this collision, but that wild beast was sent flying. Thankfully, Ling Han had stopped in the nick of time, or it would definitely have exploded from the impact and turned into a shower of blood. Even so, this wild beast was still dazed. It could not even stand steadily, and was turning around in circles on the spot. Ling Han could see very clearly. This was a massive green frog. Its back was dark green in color, while its belly was white. There were 3 golden strokes on its forehead, and if there was another vertical stroke, it could call itself the King of Frogs one. We've caught up to it. At this time, 3 people also arrived, as quick as lightning. Chapter 2504, The Duplicate Moon Sect. Chapter 2504, The Duplicate Moon Sect. 3 figures shot forwards from afar. Because the range of visibility here was only around 1 kilometer, when Ling Han saw them, the 3 of them had actually arrived within his vicinity. Ling Han's eyes swept over them, and saw that this trio was made up of 2 men and a woman. They were all very young, but looked imposing. They were actually all at the ascending origin tier, and all of them were in the consummate level at that. He saw that they were only several tens of millions of years old, yet all of them had reached the consummate level of the ascending origin tier, and were only a single step away from the celestial king tier. Hold on, how were cultivation levels differentiated in this place? Ling Han could only make deductions based on the strength of the aura they emanated that they were equivalent to the ascending origin tier in the celestial realm. Their natural talent was indeed extraordinary. The 3 of them paid no mind to Ling Han, and merely went on to kill that giant green frog. Because the giant green frog was already dazed from colliding with Ling Han, it was soon dealt with when the 3 of them suppressed it forcefully. Haha, now that we have the venom sac of this golden-veined frog, we will be able to cure the illness of Master's wife. The 3 of them stowed the giant green frog away, and all of them were extremely delighted. Ling Han also smiled slightly. He had finally seen someone, so he knew that he was not just running around aimlessly here. Then, he could just have these 3 people lead the way, or simply follow them in secret, and he naturally would be able to walk out of this swamp. Yi, why is there another person here? Strange, hidden radiance stage? How could even a hidden radiance stage dare to enter here? The trio discovered Ling Han, and all of them looked surprised. After these several days, Ling Han's grasp of regulations had already returned once more to the severing mundane tier. Since the other party said that he was at the so-called hidden radiance stage, this was probably one of the classes of cultivation levels in this transcendent dimension. The hidden radiance stage should be the equivalent of the severing mundane tier. How did you get in here? A young man asked Ling Han. He was dressed in a tight bodysuit of green. Ling Han had absolutely zero knowledge of this world, and thus chose to keep an extremely low profile, and said, I don't know myself. I was just practicing my cultivation technique, when all of a sudden, a black hole swallowed me up. Then, I realized I had ended up here, and no matter what I tried, I could not walk my way out. His words mixed truth with lie, and were actually very close to the truth. He only made no mention that he had come from the celestial realm via the dimensional transfer seal. Even if he did, they might not believe it, unless he exhibited the might of his body art. What was the point? The 3 people exchanged looks, and all felt this was inconceivable. But if that hadn't been the case, what other explanation would there have been that a person in the hidden radiance stage could come into the cloudy dream marsh? It is indeed possible that a sudden twist in space occurred, and randomly transported someone into any corner of the world, the other young man in blue attire said. I have heard Master say that this is because of the Great War outside the realm, which has affected the stability of space. The man in green and the woman in red both nodded. Since this was what Master said, it had to be the case. Let's bring him along, the woman in red said. The man in green nodded. With his little bit of strength, to say nothing of having to take a good many years just to walk out of the cloudy dream marsh, he would have long since been devoured by the wild beasts here. Continue the lecture after we have brought him out of the swamp. The man in blue nodded in agreement as well. The man in green moved, and his power took the form of a giant hand, which took hold of Ling Han. The 3 of them both soared, dancing through the air as they flew. Their speed was actually not as fast as Ling Han's, But Ling Han was not concerned about this little bit of time difference. Expressing his thanks, he began to cultivate. His grasp of regulations had to return to the Celestial King tier as soon as possible. After all, this would limit the growth of his body art as well. Seeing how Ling Han was actually closing his eyes to cultivate, the woman in red and her companions clicked their tongues in amazement as they thought, "This brat really has great composure. He can actually keep his cool to cultivate in this kind of situation." This trip actually took as long as 3 months. They finally left the swamp, and a mountain forest appeared ahead of them instead. The man in green set Ling Han down, and was just about to tell Ling Han to go on his own way when his eyes suddenly widened. "Senior brother Luo, what is it?" the woman in red asked. The man in green pointed at Ling Han, and even his face was twitching. "Chi-chi-chi. What's up with him? He suddenly sprouted horns," the man in blue joked, but when his eyes swept over Ling Han, his eyes bulged in a similar way. 4th level of the hidden radiance. The woman in red also looked over, and instantly exclaimed in shock. What kind of joke was this? Previously, this guy had just barely advanced into the hidden radiance stage. Why was he now already at the 4th level of the hidden radiance stage? This progress was so fast, who would ever believe it? An extraordinary genius. Incomparably extraordinary genius. They all exclaimed, incredibly stunned. "Strange, why is there no heavenly tribulation?" the man in green murmured. This was illogical. No matter what, there should have been 3 instances of heavenly tribulation. The woman in red pondered for a moment. There are a rare few that can progress at a rate as fast as this. Perhaps, he is a beloved child of the heaven and earth, so there will be no heavenly tribulation imposed on him. Was this even possible? The man in green and the man in blue exchanged looks, but it seemed like only this explanation was more logical. "What is your name?" the woman in red suddenly asked Ling Han. "Ling Han. Are you willing to join the duplicate moon sect?" the woman in red asked further. Ling Han pretended to consider the question. "I know nothing about the duplicate moon sect." The man in green immediately understood. He was a supremely excellent young talent. If they could bring him into their sect, he would definitely become a strong pillar of support for the sect. Furthermore, they, as the people who had discovered Ling Han's talent, would acquire a relationship that would be enough to benefit them for their whole lifetime. "It's fine even if you don't know. Just go and take a look. In any case, you are not able to return to your original location now," he said. The man in blue hurriedly nodded. "That's right. Come and take a look." Once they went to the duplicate moon sect, they had the confidence that Ling Han would never want to leave again. That place was the amazing sight of a celestial king. Ling Han was also of a mind to find out more about this world, so he nodded, and agreed to join the 3 of them. The 4 of them arrived at the closest city. There was a transfer formation here which allowed for convenient travel to various locations. Ling Han took the opportunity to chat idly with the 3 of them, and feigned ignorance so he could find out more about this world. The man in green was named Luo Xing, the man in blue robes was Ji Xueming, and the woman in red was Li Huan, and they were all disciples of the duplicate moon sect. The purpose of them coming out this time was that giant green frog, and the reason was their master's wife, in other words, the wife of the sect master of duplicate moon sect, who had fallen ill, and this illness could only be cured with the use of that giant green frog. Their master could not free himself, because he had to constantly use his own power to maintain the vital signs of his wife. Otherwise, there was a chance that she could die at any instant. Thus, they moved on behalf of their master, seeking the means to cure their master's wife. Though it had taken some time, the end result was still good. And added with Ling Han, their venture could be considered perfect. This transcendent dimension was called the Flaming Frost Realm, and the hierarchy of cultivation levels was actually not much different from the Celestial Realm. The only difference was in the different names of various cultivation levels. And here, Celestial Kings were also called Celestial Kings, while Heavenly Venerates were also Heavenly Venerates. There was not much difference. However, the 3 of them knew absolutely nothing about the horrifying big guy, Hysteria. They only knew that there was a battlefield outside their realm, and war never ended there. Even ascending origin tiers like them were not worthy of taking part in this kind of conflict yet. Ling Han guessed that that was where the war against hysteria was taking place. Indeed, even celestial kings were not qualified to interfere, what more ascending origin tiers. Even if there was a transference portal that could greatly decrease journeying time, they still needed more than half a year to finally arrive at the foot of the peaceful Sun Mountains. This was where the duplicate moon sect was located, but the peaceful Sun Mountains were extremely massive. There was actually still quite a considerable distance until the duplicate moon sect's actual location. Stop. 10 people suddenly appeared in front of them, blocking their path. Chapter 2505, Traitor. Chapter 2505, Traitor. 10 people appeared, blocking the entry into the mountains for Ling Han and the others. Who are you people? Luo Xing demanded immediately. A bearded middle-aged man from the other side rubbed his chin and grinned. It is not important who we are. What is important is that all of you will have to stay here, and have a nice chat with us. Seventh Brother Ma, we have no wish to chat with 3 men. Immediately, someone joined in the excitement. That's right. Even if we want to chat, it has to be with a woman. This young miss is quite pretty. Haha, we love talking and chatting with this kind of woman. And it has to be an open-minded chat too one. These people all laughed raucously. Though their words were very indecent, there was no hint of anything perverted or lewd in their expressions. Their goal seemed to be to only anger Li Huan and the others. Though Li Huan very much wanted to suppress her fury, she was still trembling with anger, flames of rage flickering in her eyes. To dare act so insolently in front of the entrance of our duplicate moon sect, you people are truly outrageously bold. Luo Xing declared menacingly. He had already drawn a long saber. Light reflected off the saber's blade, emitting an intimidating chill. I am so afraid. One of the people who had blocked their way wrapped his arms around himself, and then erupted into loud laughter. Duplicate moon sect. After a few more years, it will be hard to say whether this sect will still even exist. How dare you? Luo Xing and the others rebuked at the same time. Your Lord Sect Master is busy maintaining the vital signs for your Lady Sect Mistress. As long as your Lady Sect Mistress never recovers, your Lord Sect Master will only become weaker and weaker, one the people who had intercepted them said, bearing a strange smile on his face. Luo Xing and the others were startled, and then immediately looked stunned. Could it be, you are members of the Red Flower Sect? You guessed correctly, one of the people who had intercepted them replied. Could it be that Lord Sect Mistress's illness is the result of one of your ploys? Luo Xing exclaimed in shock. Another correct guess. These people who had blocked their way were all laughing loudly. The expressions of Luo Xing and his group changed drastically. From the look of things now, this matter was entirely a conspiracy from the very beginning. The Red Flower Sect was a direct competitor of the Duplicate Moon Sect. Who knew how many years the two sects had been clashing for to contend for a bountiful mine, which produced precious divine stones? In fact, it was possible that even divine metal could be mined from it. Thus, this was a site that they would definitely fight over, and for the sake of this, who knew how many years the two great sects had been fighting for? The strongest elite of the Duplicate Moon Sect was naturally their Lord Sect Master, whose name was Azure Sun Celestial King, and his cultivation level had reached the second heaven. And the Azure Sun Celestial King was the only Celestial King in the Duplicate Moon Sect. Thus, as long as he was gotten rid of, it would naturally be an easy matter to destroy the Duplicate Moon Sect. The Red Flower Sect had finally found an opening as well, and that was the wife of the Azure Sun Celestial King. Azure Sun Celestial King loved her deeply. Have the sect master's wife fall ill so that the Azure Sun Celestial King would have to endlessly use his own power to maintain her vital signs. As long as the sect master's wife did not recover, the Azure Sun Celestial King's battle prowess would be restrained, and eventually, there would come a day when his vitality would be greatly wounded. That way, when the Red Flower Sect launched a heavy assault, the Duplicate Moon Sect could possibly crumble overnight. Being able to reach the ascending origin tier, Luo Xing and his group naturally could not be fools. Immediately, they guessed the truth behind the matter, and couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. This was a conspiracy, But it was also an overt conspiracy because even if the Azure Sun Celestial King knew, so what? Would he cease his actions? No wonder these people wanted to stop them from returning to the sect. They naturally could not allow the lady sect mistress to recover from her illness. You people are too despicable. Luo Xing and his group rebuked. He, who asked your Lord Sect Master to be a romantic? The people who had blocked their path all laughed loudly. They had long since expected this, and had thus planted a great many elites at the foot of the mountains to snipe disciples such as Luo Xing. Die! Luo Xing exclaimed darkly. Ji Xueming nodded. Junior sister Li, senior brother Luo and I will hold these people back later. You break through with all your power and ascend the mountains. As long as Master gets the news, he will definitely descend the mountains to save us. If they called out for help here, it would be too far a distance. There was no way that they would be able to get any reinforcements. Otherwise, the enemies would not have intercepted them here. Li Huan looked hesitant, but still nodded. Senior brothers, you guys have to take care of yourselves. Charge! Luo Xing bellowed loudly. Li Huan immediately charged out, but a flash of sword light swept out, and directly sank into the back of Li Huan's head. No one had expected this scene, and Li Huan had never imagined that an attack would come towards her from her rear. Her whole mind was focused on breaking through the blockade, so she had been caught completely off guard. Instantly, the attack landed on her full-on. She collapsed, blood seeping all over the ground. Who had done this? Everyone turned to look towards Ji Xueming, and saw this man suddenly break out into a strange-looking, chilling grin. Ji Xueming, you're mad. Luo Xing roared in fury. It was Ji Xueming who had delivered this sword strike. I'm mad. Ji Xueming laughed loudly. Suddenly, he made an extremely strange hand gesture. When the members of the Red Flower sect saw this, they all couldn't help but feel stunned. They had not recovered their wits from seeing the scene of fellow members of the same sect kill each other, and when they saw Ji Xueming's hand gesture, they were even more surprised. Hurriedly, they all bowed. Greetings, young sect master. What? Luo Xing felt a chill come over his whole body. This junior brother of his was actually a member of the Red Flower sect. Ji Xueming broke into a smile. Before joining the duplicate moon sect, I was already the young sect master of the Red Flower sect, but master has never brought me back to the sect, so this matter is known to no one. Luo Xing's eyes turned, and he thought of another possibility. He couldn't help but become even more angered. You were also the one who poisoned Mrs. His tone was one of affirmation because this matter had always seemed strange. Their Mrs. never usually descended the mountains, so how else would she have gotten poisoned? Thus, if it was the action of one of their own, it could explain everything. Ji Xueming smiled slightly. That's right. It was me. Luo Xing trembled. The Red Flower sect had really invested very much into this scheme because Ji Xueming had joined the sect 30 million years ago. In other words, this scheme had already been planned and put into action over 30 million years ago. When Ji Xueming finally entered into the threshold, and won the full trust of the Azure Sun Celestial King, the truth would finally be revealed. Too frightening. This was too frightening. Thus, strictly speaking, I am no traitor, right? Ji Xueming said, his expression calm. Now, it was 11 against 1. Oh, right, there was Ling Han as well, but he was only in the hidden radiant stage, so he was completely insignificant. Ji Xueming's chances of victory were assured. He only had to get rid of Luo Xing, and he would be completely capable of striding boldly back into the duplicate moon sect. As for the deaths of Li Huan and Luo Xing, he would find some excuse to explain the matter. Luo Xing was in despair. Ji Xueming, having revealed his true identity, would naturally have complete confidence that he could get rid of Luo Xing, and ensure that the secret would not be leaked. He was done for, and with a traitor like Ji Xueming there, the duplicate moon sect would soon collapse as well. Ha ha ha. Luo Xing laughed tragically, tears of blood streaming from his eyes. He drew a long saber, his fighting spirit soaring. Only death will end this battle. Who will come to their death? Even if I die, there will be another who will die with me. Yet Ji Xueming shook his head. Senior brother Luo, you seem to be a little dull-witted. Could it be that you still do not know my personality? Since I have moved, would I leave you any room to struggle? Luo Xing's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly inspected himself. He couldn't help but become extremely furious. You actually poisoned me. Ha 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 ha, the best strategy is to deal with your enemies without any need for battle. Ji Xueming laughed. On the basis that we once were comrades of the same sect, let me send you off on your last trip. He was just about to take a step forward when his body involuntarily shuddered as he revealed a hint of shock. Li Huan, who should have died earlier on, had suddenly stood back up. He had to be seeing things. Chapter 2506, Coming Back to Life. Chapter 2506, Coming Back to Life. A person that Ji Xueming had clearly killed suddenly stood back up. How could he not feel a chill rise up his spine at the sight? It should be known that while there were in this world supreme elites that could destroy stars and crumble the ground with a single move, and could evaporate the sea with a single breath, there was definitely no possible way a dead person could be revived. Yes, a heavenly venerate could do it, but even a heavenly venerate would have to pay an exorbitant price for it. It was definitely not something as simple as just a casual move. If it was to be claimed that Li Huan had been revived by a heavenly venerate, Ji Xueming wouldn't believe it even if it killed him. But the problem here was that Li Huan really had stood up. Senior Sister Li. Luo Xing was filled with pleasant surprise, but at the same time also felt slightly cautious because who knew whether Li Huan was of the same flock as Ji Xueming, putting an act on for his sake merely for the sake of launching a sneak attack on him. Of course, the chance of this was too low. Luo Xing was already poisoned at present, and the enemy had as many as 11 ascending origin tiers. No matter how he thought, there would be no need to use such a low-handed trick. Ji, Shui, Ming. Li Huan spat out each word, her voice filled with fury. Ji Xueming forcefully kept his cool. He stared at Li Huan. I do not believe that a dead person can come back to life. You probably have some kind of treasure to substitute for you, right? How could Li Huan have anything? She only knew that a sword had struck her from behind, and she had been completely unguarded, but just when the blade of the sword had been about to touch the back of her head, a powerful force had pushed her down, and then she could not move at all. Hearing Ji Xueming's performance, she was practically exploding with anger. Subsequently, she suddenly recovered mobility, and then stood back up. In truth, she was also very confused. Could it be that there was an elite helping them in secret? She naturally would not be giving him any explanation. She rebuked, "You shameless man, you will not get an easy death." Actually, Ji Xueming would not feel the slightest fear towards a living person. What he was concerned about now was just why Li Huan had managed to come back to life. He smiled slightly, and said, "Senior Sister Li, could it be that you have forgotten my previous words? I have always been the type to leave nothing to chance." Clearly, it was not just Luo Xing he had poisoned. Even Li Huan had not been exempted. Li Huan's expression instantly changed. Ji Xueming stabbing her from behind should have only been a whim of his as he just happened to have the opportunity to do so, but poisoning both her and Luo Xing definitely had to have been a long-planned conspiracy. He had the intentions, and they were unguarded against him. Who would have thought that a fellow disciple whom they had lived with for tens of millions of years would actually be an undercover agent from an enemy sect? Though I have to expend a little more effort, it has absolutely no effect on the greater picture, Ji Xueming said. With a wave of his hand, the 10 ascending origin tiers from the Red Flower sect immediately walked over, approaching Luo Xing and Li Huan. Both Li Huan and Luo Xing frowned deeply. Now that things had progressed this far, it seemed like they could predict their end by now. Sigh. Linghan sighed. Was he really a bringer of calamity that would encounter trouble wherever he went? He had only wanted to find some place to settle down and ascertain the situation. Then, he could find out where the Empress and the others were, and go over calmly. Why wasn't he allowed to relax just a bit? Brother Ling, what are you sighing for? Ji Xueming asked laughingly. You have no need to fear. I will not kill you. I will study absolutely thoroughly a prodigy of cultivation like you. This kind of ability, I very much wish to possess it. To practically cultivate the hidden radiance stage completely within half a year's time was a kind of natural talent that could only be described as legendary, which filled him with curiosity, as well as greed. Ling Han broke into a smile. Could it be that you are not curious just how this woman came back to life? Ji Xueming laughed loudly. Could it be it was you behind it, then? I have never coveted the merits of others, but I would not hide my actions, either. Of course, it was me. Ling Han nodded. Ji Xueming would naturally not believe it. Ling Han was but a mere hidden radiance stage. If he did have that kind of strength, wouldn't even pigs fly? Kill them, he said lowly. The 10 members of the Red Flower sect charged out. They had long since lost their patience. Begone! Ling Han roared, and his voice instantly rumbled out like thunder, deafening and ear-splitting. Every single person felt their mind buzz, and then all that was left was a complete blank. When they came back to their senses, they were all looking at Ling Han with eyes filled with absolute shock. The might of a roar was actually so frightening. Just how terrifyingly strong was this person then? It really was you. Ji Xueming pointed a finger at Ling Han as he stuttered, his hand trembling slightly. Ling Han smiled faintly. He had secretly given Li Huan a slight shove when Ji Xueming had attacked just now. As for the blood, that was real. Li Huan had indeed sustained injury, but it was not too severe. He gave another shout. Azure Sun Celestial King, please come out for a meeting. Boom, the sound turned into a terrifying ripple that reverberated throughout the peaceful Sun Mountain. The shouts of Luo Xing and Li Huan could not be transmitted because of their limited strength, but Ling Han's body art had directly reached the peak stage of the 5th heaven. With this shout, there was no issue to envelop the whole of the peaceful Sun Mountains. In merely an instant, a figure streaked through the air and arrived. This person was enshrouded in 2 streaks of peculiar light. This was a symbol that could not be any more obvious. This person was a 2nd heaven celestial king. The Azure Sun Celestial King. How dare you? The Azure Sun Celestial King's eyes swept over them, and he instantly humphed. Members of the Red Flower sect actually dared come here to cause trouble. Were they really planning to step all over him? Though he could not travel far, it was fine for him to just leave slightly for a short while. Ji Xueming shuddered fearfully, and he knelt onto the ground with a sudden turn of his eyes. Master, you have finally come. I thought I would never be able to see you again. Both senior brother Luo and junior sister Li are traitors, and they were the ones who poisoned Mrs. This. To say nothing of both Li Huan and Luo Xing feeling utter fury, even Ling Han was slightly surprised. Could a person really be as shameless as this? Master, he is spouting rubbish. He is the undercover agent from the Red Flower sect. Luo Xing hurriedly exclaimed. Li Huan also nodded repeatedly. The moment the Azure Sun Celestial King appeared, they had subconsciously ignored Ling Han, because in their hearts and eyes, their master was the strongest person of all, and Ling Han was not enshrouded by any peculiar light, so how could he be a celestial king? The Azure Sun Celestial King naturally held his own judgment. Just look at the situation now. 10 elites of the Red Flower sect had surrounded Luo Xing and Li Huan, and Ji Xueming was standing outside of the siege. Was that still not enough to describe the problem? Unfilial disciple. This celestial king humphed coldly. Now that things had reached this point, he naturally understood the reason behind his wife's illness. He moved. Boom, the might of a celestial king surged out. Even if there were 11 ascending origin tiers on Ji Xueming's side, so what? The difference between a celestial king and an ascending origin tier was like the difference between an adult and an infant. No matter how big the advantage in numbers was, there was no way that the gap in strength between the two sides could be compensated. With the descent of a single palm strike, the 10 ascending origin tiers were all turned into pools of blood instantly, and Ji Xueming was apprehended. This unfilial disciple definitely could not be executed so easily. Ji Xueming trembled in fear. He was in despair, and his eyes were set on Ling Han. If it were not because of him, how could he have fallen to this? Ling Han shook his head. Ask yourself this question first. Do you have the right to fault others? This person is. The Azure Sun Celestial King looked towards Li Huan and Luo Xing. His name is Ling Han, and we encountered him at the Cloudy Dream Marsh. Just now, it seemed like he was the one who helped me out of a crisis, Luo Xing said. He could not distinguish Ling Han's strength at all, and could only offer a vague description. Oh! The Azure Sun Celestial King paused slightly. Friend, please join me on the mountain, and allow me to serve you some fragrant tea. Chapter 2507, Gifting a Mine. Chapter 2507, Gifting a Mine. Friend. Surprisingly, the Azure Sun Celestial King continued to refer to Ling Han as a friend. What did this signify? This signified that the Azure Sun Celestial King was willing to treat Ling Han as his equal, as someone with equivalent status to him. Who could enjoy a status equivalent to Celestial Kings? Naturally, only fellow Celestial Kings. Gasp! Luo Xing and Li Huan were both stunned upon realizing this. Even though they had already harbored suspicions, they were still given a huge fright when this was confirmed. They had actually brought a Celestial King back. However, this person didn't look like a Celestial King at all. Ling Han smiled faintly, and replied, "All right. Please," the Azure Sun Celestial King said as he gestured in invitation. He then grabbed his two disciples and flew away first, appearing relaxed and elegant as his robes billowed in the wind. However, his speed was in fact astonishing as he soared toward the mountain. Meanwhile, Ling Han calmly ran beside the Azure Sun Celestial King, not falling behind a single inch. Upon seeing this, Luo Xing and the others finally dispelled all of their doubts. Ling Han was definitely a Celestial King. Otherwise, how could his speed match that of the Azure Sun Celestial King? In fact, even the Azure Sun Celestial King was slightly shocked. No matter how he looked, Ling Han was only at the hidden radiance stage. It was only because of Ling Han's shout just then that he had confirmed that he was at the Celestial King tier. Otherwise, he wouldn't have rushed over in astonishment. In any case, he truly couldn't make head nor tail of Ling Han's situation. Even as a Celestial King, he was still filled with confusion. After arriving atop the mountain, Li Huan retrieved the golden-veined frog. This naturally delighted the Azure Sun Celestial King. This main medicine was truly far too difficult to obtain. Because of the Cloudy Dream Marsh's peculiar environment, even the vision of Celestial Kings would be severely affected. As such, trying to find a golden-veined frog there would be incredibly difficult. Moreover, he hadn't been able to leave, either, so he had no option but to send his disciples out. Unexpectedly, they actually managed to surprise him with success. The Azure Sun Celestial King took his leave first, impatiently rushing away to concoct the medicine to save his wife. When he finally finished, 3 days had already passed. When he returned to meet Ling Han, he wore an extremely exhausted expression. However, this still couldn't conceal his excitement. "Thank you so much, friend," the Azure Sun Celestial King said as he clasped his hands in gratitude. If it weren't for Ling Han, they would have definitely failed to obtain the golden-veined frog. At the same time, it would have also been impossible to uncover that Ji Xueming was a traitor, and the duplicate moon sect might have truly suffered the terrible fate planned for them. It might have suddenly collapsed one day, and perhaps the Azure Sun Celestial King would have been able to flee, but his wife would definitely be killed. Thus, the Azure Sun Celestial King was extremely sincere when he expressed his gratitude. Ling Han calmly accepted his thanks, saying, "We can regard this as fate." The Azure Sun Celestial King naturally became even more moved. He talked about all matters under the sun with Ling Han, and this caused him to admire Ling Han even more. Ling Han also seized this opportunity to ask about the Heavenly Venerable tier. Even though the Azure Sun Celestial King's knowledge of this matter was limited, he at least still knew one important piece of information. That was, 1,000,000 years ago, Heavenly Venerate Zhu Heng had returned with numerous supreme prodigies, placing all of them in the world's paramount martial academy. This had caused a huge stir. World's paramount. Ling Han repeated this in his mind, and he couldn't help but chuckle. With the Flaming Frost Realm being a super high-level dimension, and with so many Heavenly Venerates working together, this academy indeed had the right to be named as the world's paramount. Zhu Heng had said that it wasn't only him bringing prodigies to the academy. Several other heavenly venerates would also be bringing monarch tears and monarch stars over from the various dimensions, nurturing them in the hopes of producing more heavenly venerates. Thus, the world's paramount martial academy would definitely be brimming with supreme talents. Would there be freaks with an evolution index of 12? Most definitely. Ling Han's fighting spirit was instantly ignited. In fact, he was itching to immediately rush over to the world's paramount martial academy to spar with all of those prodigies. Ling Han asked for more detail about the world's paramount martial academy, yet the Azure Sun Celestial King didn't know much about this topic. Ling Han was slightly disappointed upon learning this. Forget about it, he would worry about this when he went to the academy. In any case, it was inevitable that he would go. When they parted, the Azure Sun Celestial King directly gifted a mine to Ling Han in order to express his gratitude. Several days later, Ling Han appeared in this mine. "Heh, what a sly person this Azure Sun Celestial King is," Ling Han said with a smile and a shake of his head. This was the mine that the Red Flower Sect and the Duplicate Moon Sect had been fighting over this entire time. In reality, it was still unclear who owned this mine. On one day, the Red Flower Sect might push the Duplicate Moon Sect away, and on another day, the opposite might happen. Thus, neither sect was able to mine this area. Now that the Azure Sun Celestial King had gifted this mine to Ling Han, his act of seeming generosity was actually accompanied by this troublesome baggage as well. From another perspective, the Azure Sun Celestial King was also greatly disheartened. In his fight for this mine, he had come extremely close to losing his wife. This allowed him to reach a realization. There was no need to care so much about some external matter. However, he was also unwilling to surrender this mine to the Red Flower Sect for no reason. Thus, gifting it to Ling Han was naturally the best course of action. "He's also managed to transfer this trouble to me," Ling Han murmured. If the Red Flower Sect discovered his presence in the mines, they would definitely send people over to stop him. Thus, unless Ling Han was willing to abandon the mine, it was inevitable that they would clash. In any case, it was possible that divine metal existed in this mine. Even if this was only a possibility, Ling Han was still determined to explore it. He was in desperate need of divine metal. He needed to forge his own heavenly venerate tool. Ling Han continued to mull over other issues as he walked toward the mine. He definitely had to eliminate Heavenborn. However, a sliver of the karmic life Heavenly Venerable's imprint most likely existed inside Heavenborn, so would it be possible to destroy the latter's soul and allow the karmic life Heavenly Venerable to take over? If this were possible, wouldn't the karmic life Heavenly Venerable be reborn? With the karmic life Heavenly Venerable's prodigious talent, and with Heavenborn's incredible physique, just what kind of lofty height would he reach in the future? Ling Han was filled with eager anticipation upon thinking of this. He had never dreamed about being the lone hero in this world. Hysteria had reached the 7th tier of the Heavenly Venerable tier long ago, and it had more so transformed its own body into a dimension. Its strength was definitely paramount in the Genesis world. Slaying Hysteria by himself? That was simply impossible. Thus, the more 7th tier Heavenly Venerates there were, the better. After reaching a certain number, they could definitely rival Hysteria. When this number was surpassed, could they perhaps slay Hysteria and bring peace and tranquility back to the Genesis world? As long as Hysteria remained, the Genesis world would face the threat of being fully engulfed by it. At that time, everything would descend into desolation and destruction. Halt! Just as his mind was wandering, not paying attention to the surroundings, he suddenly heard the angry shout of someone. He looked up, only to see a mountain face before him. There were camps to either side, yet one of them was already empty. Meanwhile, the other camp was fervently constructing something. The person who had shouted at him was an ascending origin tier elite. He wore a grey hat, and his eyes were filled with sharpness and ferocity. It was clear that the Duplicate Moon Sect had already retreated. Right now, the Red Flower Sect was preparing to open this mine. Ling Han smiled, and said, "The Azure Sun Celestial King has already gifted this mine to me. You guys don't need to worry about me, either. I'll leave after having a look around." He naturally couldn't care less about ordinary ore. He only needed divine metal. "Ha. What an absolute fool," the man with the grey hat said with loud laughter. Swoosh. He dashed forward and viciously thrust forth his spear, causing the wind to whistle. Even though Ling Han only appeared to be at the hidden radiant stage, this man was an extremely careful person. Thus, he had attacked with his full strength, afraid that Ling Han had cultivated some technique that allowed him to conceal his true cultivation level. After all, the duplicate moon sect's sudden retreat was far too unreasonable. Thus, it was only natural that he acted with extreme caution. Ling Han simply ignored him as he continued to stride forward. Peng! The spear struck him, yet an even more terrifying power reverberated, causing the spear to instantly shoot back. The butt of the spear was blunt, yet it ruthlessly pierced through the heart of the man with the grey hat with a plop. Chapter 2508 Obtaining Divine Metal. Chapter 2508 Obtaining Divine Metal. The eyes of the man with the grey hat widened in shock and disbelief. He had actually been killed by his own weapon. The butt of the spear hadn't been decorated with symbols of slaughter, so being injured by it should only have resulted in ordinary flesh wounds. Yet, the man felt a terrifying aura crashing through his body, obliterating his life force and causing him to become weaker and weaker. He was on the verge of death. However, he was going to die a confused death. How could a measly hidden radiant stage brat possibly be so powerful? Even if the brat were at the same cultivation level as him, he still couldn't have been so powerful. Unless he was a celestial king. However, did the duplicate moon sect have a second celestial king? Before he could finish this thought, he lost his consciousness forever. Ling Han didn't pay any heed to this as he continued to stride forward. To him, this was nothing more than a slight disturbance. After all, who had told that person to attack him without a single word? Lord Mayu has been killed. Not good. Lord Mayu has been killed. The camp instantly descended into chaos upon realizing that the man with the grey cap had been killed. They all ran around like headless chooks. A group of ascending origin tier elites charged over, wearing expressions of fury as they glared at Ling Han. However, none of them attacked. They hadn't noticed any signs of battle over here just then, yet the man with the grey hat had suddenly been killed. Was Ling Han too powerful? Thus, they naturally couldn't attack him recklessly. "Sir, who are you?" someone asked in a solemn voice. Ling Han ignored his question. He arrived at the face of the mountain, yet he didn't stop there. Instead, he continued to stride forward. The elites all sneered upon seeing this. This was a mine that the two powerful celestial kings had been fighting over for a long time. Why was this? This was because this mine contained precious metallic elements that could be extracted and refined into precious ores that were only inferior to divine metal. It was also because of this that the mountain here was unbelievably solid and sturdy. To say nothing of ascending origin tier cultivators, even celestial kings could only blast a small opening in the mountain with their full strength. Yet, this person wanted to crash through the mountain just like that. What an utter fool. However, in the next instant, their eyes bulged out in deep shock. Like a steel ox entering water, Ling Han slowly pushed into the mountain. It wasn't that the mountain wall had become water, but rather that Ling Han was like an indestructible weapon that could brutally carve into the mountain. Shards of rock and dust continued to rain down. This was a sign of Ling Han's immense power. He had shattered the mountain wall with his brute strength. This was far too terrifying. He wasn't moving quickly at all, and he was simply striding forward at a leisurely pace. Yet, he had still managed to cause such frightening destruction to the mountain. Just how explosive was his power? Everyone trembled upon seeing this. They naturally didn't dare to attack at this moment. After all, charging over would be seeking death. Ling Han had activated his body art, which was something tempered by the void particle energy, the fundamental power of the Genesis world. Even a small movement could unleash a devastating destructive power. Thus, he was able to easily crash through the mountain. He continued to stride forward at a leisurely pace. Others needed to expend a great deal of effort to mine this area, yet he could easily stroll around in a casual manner. When his body completely vanished into the mountain, the group of elites finally exhaled in relief. "What should we do?" they asked as they exchanged glances. They could all see the cold sweat on each other's foreheads. "There's no way we can stop this person, so we had better report this matter to the sect master." Millimeter. Someone immediately returned to the Red Flower sect to deliver this information. The Red Flower sect wasn't far from here, so it only took 2 days for the sect master of the Red Flower sect to appear at the mine. Even though the sect was called the Red Flower sect, the sect master wasn't actually a woman. Instead, it was a burly man who had a head of messy hair. He was also bare-chested. Who would have imagined at a glance that he was a calculating and scheming person? Who would have imagined that he had laid a trap that would take tens of millions of years to discover? Even though he was already aware of the situation, he was still astonished when he saw the cave carved out by Ling Han. The sect master of the Red Flower sect reached over and placed a hand on the mountain wall. Crumble. A large area of the mountain wall instantly transformed into sand that fell to the floor. "Sect master is so mighty," the elites instantly exclaimed in delight upon seeing this. This greatly increased their morale. The sect master of the Red Flower sect also smiled faintly. However, his mind was filled with shock. Even though his attack had appeared casual, only he knew that he had expended a great deal of energy. However, according to his subordinates, that mysterious person hadn't unleashed a single attack at all. Instead, he had walked in head first just like that. Even so, he had still caused the mountain wall to crumble. With such a comparison, the sect master immediately knew that his strength was far inferior. Where had the duplicate moon sect found such a formidable person? At this moment, he had thoughts of abandoning this mine. However, he was also unwilling to do this, especially since he had already schemed for so long. Moreover, was he going to give up without even seeing his opponent's face? At the very least, he would wait until Ling Han came out to make a decision. These thoughts raced through his mind. Meanwhile, Ling Han continued to casually stroll around the mine, searching for divine metal. In fact, this entire mountain was formed from origin metal, and it contained an astonishing amount of high-level precious metals. This was as expected of a high-level dimension. In the celestial realm, the next step down from divine metal was godly metal. There was no other transition metal, and one could only forge godly metal into pseudo-divine metal. Here, however, such transition metals existed. Under a more powerful heaven and earth, the precious metals here were far superior in quality to godly metal. Thus, it was indeed possible for divine metal to exist here. Divine metal was naturally at the celestial king tier, so it possessed a particular wavelength that Ling Han was currently scanning for. However, the precious metals greatly affected Ling Han's divine sense, so this severely limited the size of the area that he could scan. His progress wasn't quick, and the mountain was also far too large. Who knew where the divine metal was? Perhaps it didn't exist at all. However, Ling Han was unhurried as he continued to advance. This was divine metal, after all, something that all celestial kings dreamed of obtaining. If it could be obtained so easily, would it still be rare and coveted? Fuck. Just as he was thinking this, he suddenly discovered a green ore that was as big as a fist. It was clearly extraordinary at first glance, and it exuded a dense celestial chi. Perhaps even ascending origin tier elites wouldn't be able to near this ore, or else they would directly be obliterated by the powerful aura that surrounded it. Divine metal. Ling Han was astonished. He had just been thinking about the rarity of divine metal, and before he could even finish this thought, a piece had suddenly appeared before him. "I should be ecstatic, right?" Ling Han said with a laugh. He picked up the piece of divine metal. He didn't plan to feed this piece of divine metal to his divine demon sword, nor did he plan to forge it into a weapon. Instead, he was going to forge it into a spatial god tool. No, a spatial celestial tool. In terms of forging divine metal, unless it was a heavenly venerate, did they need to worry about destroying the divine metal? Ever since the Black Tower had fallen quiet, Ling Han had always been worried about how he would protect and hide those around him. This was because intense battles would damage spatial god tools. This caused him to be extremely anxious when he battled, and he was often unable to focus his full attention on his battles. This is truly a huge help. With a smile, he turned around to leave. Even though he could forcefully carve out another path to leave, that would consume his energy, after all, so was there any need to do that? After a few hours, he exited the cave from the path that he had created. Ling Han instantly felt a powerful aura surge over. He involuntarily looked over, only to see a burly and messy second heaven celestial king. The sect master of the Red Flower sect. Ling Han's first reaction was an urge to laugh. However, he knew that it was disrespectful to laugh about other people's appearance, so he forcefully suppressed this urge. However, he still couldn't help but steal a few extra glances at the Celestial King. The other man truly brought shame to the title of Celestial King. The sect master of the Red Flower sect was also sizing up Ling Han. He became even more astounded. He clearly couldn't detect a formidable aura of regulations around Ling Han. This person was genuinely at the hidden radiance stage. However, this was simply impossible. In the next moment, his attention was instantly drawn to the green divine metal in Ling Han's hand. Give me back my divine metal. Chapter 2509, Forging a Spatial Celestial Tool. Chapter 2509, Forging a Spatial Celestial Tool. Ling Han faltered upon hearing this. Give him his divine metal back. His. He involuntarily laughed. He had already wanted to laugh because of the great contrast between this celestial king's appearance and title, and after hearing this, he finally couldn't hold himself back anymore. He immediately spluttered with laughter. Oh, is your name written on it? The Red Flower sect's master humphed, and said, This is the territory of my Red Flower sect, so no matter what you obtain here, it all belongs to my sect. You're going to be unreasonable then? Ling Han said in a leisurely voice. That's right, I'm going to be unreasonable. What are you going to do about it? The Red Flower sect's master humphed before waving his hand, and saying, into formation. Hundreds of ascending origin tier elites instantly started moving. A terrifying killing intent started to form. A smug expression involuntarily spread across the Red Flower sect's master's face. During the past few days, he hadn't been sitting around and waiting for Ling Han like a fool. Instead, he had made many preparations, with the most powerful one being this killing formation. In any other situation, which celestial king would walk headfirst into such a formation? However, whom could Ling Han blame for letting others set a trap for himself? Ling Han had given the other celestial king the opportunity to casually set up this formation. It was also because of this that his opponent was filled with confidence. Killing intent appeared in Ling Han's eyes. Oh, you want to kill me now? That's correct, the sect master of the Red Flower sect replied in a baleful voice. Celestial kings were incredibly valuable, regardless of whether they were alive or dead. He had never planned to only obtain that piece of divine metal. Ling Han shook his head, and said, Well then, there's nothing more to say. Indeed, there's nothing more to say. Go. Whoosh. A burst of sword light swept over, its radiance illuminating the sky. Before the Red Flower sect's master could even finish the sentence go die, his head had already been removed from his body by the vicious slash. Pang. Celestial king blood gushed into the air, triggering the grief of heaven and earth. Blood rain drizzled down. Ling Han sheathed his sword. With his current power, and with the might of the divine demon sword, would killing a second heaven celestial king be a difficult task? The other elites from the Red Flower sect were still maintaining the killing formation. However, in the blink of an eye, their sect master had already been killed. This plunged them into shock and disbelief. They involuntarily stopped what they were doing. At this moment, a cold chill gripped their bodies. Should they continue to channel the killing formation? What an absolute joke. Even their sect master had been insta-killed, so what use would this killing formation be? Could it possibly defeat their opponent? Since they still hadn't attacked Ling Han yet, which gave them a chance at reprieve, they should seize this opportunity to immediately stop and surrender. The elites all fell to their knees, not daring to move another inch. Ling Han swept his gaze over them. However, he didn't massacre them. He had no time for this. He turned around and strode away. After arriving in some city, he paid a handsome sum to buy some information, asking about where he could smelt divine metal. After all, how could ordinary flames melt divine metal? He had to find a place that possessed raging origin flames. Many people took him for a fool, yet his offer of a handsome sum would naturally attract some knowledgeable people. In the end, he still managed to gather some information. He set off, spending 1 year traveling to a volcano that had already stopped erupting long ago. The earth fire here was incredibly terrifying, and it was definitely strong enough to smelt divine metal. Such powerful regulations of flames, Ling Han said with a nod. No wonder divine metal could be smelted here. If one dived into the earth fire, they would be refined into dust even if they were a ninth heaven celestial king. Ling Han didn't waste any time, and he immediately started to refine the divine metal. This was only a crude billet that contained many impurities. Thus, he needed to purify it before he could forge it into a spatial celestial tool. Otherwise, its strength would be affected. He arrived next to the crater of the volcano. Using his mighty powers, he then extracted the earth fire to smelt the divine metal. This was a slow process. Even though the earth fire was devastatingly powerful, divine metal was divine metal, after all. How could it be refined so easily? As Ling Han looked at the scorching earth flames that were dancing with symbols, he suddenly felt an urge to jump in and extract its magnificent power to temper his own body. However, he quickly suppressed this urge. After all, he wasn't divine metal. The latter was indestructible, so it would only change shape when burned by the raging flames. However, if Ling Han were refined, he would genuinely be killed. The temperature here was far too high, so even though Ling Han's physique could endure it, the other women couldn't. It was useless even if they stayed inside the spatial god tool. This was because the spatial god tool would directly melt if it neared the flames. Thus, they all stayed outside. Ling Han spent most of his time refining the divine metal, but he would still find some time to spend with the women every few days. After all, this was an unfamiliar place, so it was necessary for him to be more cautious. He recovered his physique first, after which he activated the regulations of time to accelerate time for himself. This allowed him to refine the divine metal much quicker than before. 100 years passed, and a smile finally spread across Ling Han's face. He had finally succeeded in purifying the divine metal. It was slightly smaller than a fist, and he had forged it into the shape of a small box. Meanwhile, he had sealed the regulations of space within it, creating a small world. This small world wasn't large, and this was because Ling Han was still far from recovering his full grasp over the regulations of space. His severing mundane tear power was naturally limited. However, the wonderful thing about divine metal was its malleability. As long as his cultivation level increased, he could naturally continue to expand the space inside the spatial celestial tool. Ling Han left the volcano, placing all of the women into the spatial celestial tool. He then entered it himself. He still needed to transform this world into one that was habitable. Right now, it was sparse and empty. Ling Han moved numerous mountains and plains into it, and he also created several rivers and lakes. As things were now, he wouldn't consider adding a sea yet. After all, this world was still too small. He didn't need to specifically plant trees and flowers, either, since the mountains and plains that he had placed inside were already brimming with vegetation. Of course, there were also many animals and insects. Using his magnificent power, Ling Han also created a sun, a moon, and some stars, giving this world a cycle of day and night. He was extremely satisfied with his own handiwork. Even though the world still wasn't perfect, it possessed huge potential and boundless possibilities. In the future, he could change it as he pleased. Moreover, this was a precious tool that truly belonged to him. He didn't need to worry about it betraying him like the Black Tower had. It's time to head to the world's paramount martial academy. As Ling Han traveled, he didn't forget to cultivate in earnest. After 100 years in the volcano, he had finally reached the dividing soul tier. However, the higher one's cultivation, the slower one's progress naturally became. Even though he was a celestial king, the regulations in this realm were different and of a higher level. Thus, how could his progress be quick? If I want to return to the celestial king tier, that'll take at least another 10,000 years, right? Ling Han realized that even this might still be an optimistic estimate. However, one should naturally remain optimistic. After traveling for 7 years, Ling Han finally arrived near the world's paramount martial academy. The Flaming Frost Realm was a transcendent dimension, and it was also the most powerful dimension in the entire Genesis world. Its landmass was also humongous, and it was at least 100 times larger than the Celestial Realm. In fact, this was simply an estimation based on the information that Ling Han currently had. In reality, it was potentially even larger than this. The world's paramount martial academy was located atop Boundless Mountain. Right now, Ling Han was in a small village at the foot of Boundless Mountain, mulling over how he should enter the academy. Indeed, he was acquainted with Heavenly Venerate Ju Heng. However, was this Heavenly Venerate not busy? Could he visit him as he pleased? Moreover, Ling Han didn't like disturbing others, either. He was indeed late because of his own matters. Thus, he wanted to resolve this himself. If the Martial Academy were still recruiting, he would enter with his own strength. Even though his cultivation appeared lowly at this moment, just how powerful was his body art? It was entirely possible for him to enter the Martial Academy based on this fact alone. He sipped wine in a tavern. No matter which dimension it was, this kind of place was always the best for gathering information. Brother, let's share a table. Chapter 2510, Marketplace. Chapter 2510, Marketplace. Ling Han looked up, only to see 2 men standing next to his table. They were both very young, yet they had already reached the ascending origin tier. They were fairly powerful. One of them wore a sword on his waist, and he smiled as he said, "The tavern is full, so is it okay if we sit here? As repayment, we'll bring you to the world's paramount martial academy for a look. How does that sound?" Before Ling Han could even reply, the 2 of them had already taken a seat. They then started to indulge in loud and empty talk, acting very familiar with Ling Han. One of them was called Shu Qiong, and the other was called Tang Kai. They were both planning to go to the world's paramount martial academy to become followers of the disciples there. Even though they would only be underlings, which of the disciples of the academy wasn't a supreme prodigy of a realm? Thus, becoming their followers would also bring huge benefits. Of course, becoming their followers was also extremely difficult and competitive. Brother Ling, your cultivation is far too weak. None of the disciples will be willing to take you as their follower, Tang Kai said with a serious expression. He thought that Ling Han was the same as them. Ling Han shook his head and said, "I'm not planning to become anyone's follower." This was the truth. He had never considered becoming a follower of anyone. Instead, he wanted to become a proper disciple. However, Shu Qiong and Tang Kai naturally wouldn't think this. Instead, they thought that Ling Han was a self-aware person who knew that he was too weak to become a follower. Anyhow, they were friendly and honest people. After several cups of alcohol, they patted their chests and promised that they would definitely allow Ling Han to see the world. Brother, whether or not you can become a follower is only a small matter. A marketplace has already formed here, and there are strange and bizarre things being sold every day, Shu Qiong said. If you're fortunate enough to uncover a gem, you'll have struck it rich. Ling Han smiled and said, "Oh, then I need to have a look." Definitely. You have to realize that even the disciples of the academy go to the marketplace from time to time. If we're fortunate enough, we might even be fancied by one of them. At that time, won't we be soaring into the sky? Tang Kai said in excitement. After finishing their meal, they immediately set off for the marketplace. It wasn't long before they arrived. Sure enough, this place was a sea of people. In fact, this place was simply an expanse of empty land. However, many stands and booths had been set up, and they were more so lined up in a neat and orderly manner. Each row of stands measured hundreds of meters in length, and there were at least several hundred rows in total. Just how many stands and how many people were there? Each stand was crowded with several people looking through the goods. Exchanges here were largely completed using star stones. However, if one didn't have enough star stones, they could also use other items to pay. Of course, this was as long as both sides agreed. With Ling Han's current cultivation 1, he could strike down a celestial body with a single punch. Thus, he still had some star stones, although not very many. However, while refining the divine metal in the volcano, he had picked up some fire element crystals that were extremely valuable to cultivators who practiced the great Tao of fire. He wandered around with Tang Kai and Shu Qiong, looking through the stands. Tang Kai and Shu Qiong had already bought some items, yet Ling Han was still empty-handed. This wasn't because the items here were inferior in quality. Rather, it was because Ling Han's cultivation level was far too high. Thus, he naturally didn't care much for ordinary treasures. Only things such as divine metal could attract his attention. There were celestial medicines being sold here, yet not a single one had reached the Celestial King tier. After all, who would sell such a valuable item here? Ling Han was slightly disappointed. However, he immediately accepted this fact. If a valuable item were so easy to find, would it still be left to him to buy? With this in mind, he immediately felt at ease. However, after walking around for 10 days, he was still completely empty-handed. Right at this moment, commotion suddenly erupted in the distance. What is it? What's going on? Tang Kai asked in curiosity. He stood on his tippy toes to peer into the distance. Only after a while did they learn that a disciple of the academy had come. It was because of this that commotion had erupted. Many people had rushed over to chum up to them, trying to win their approval and become their follower. It's Doka, Tang Kai said. I think he came over from the Shattered Army realm 9 million years ago. He's a monarch tier, and I heard that he advanced to the second heaven not long ago. It's a celestial king. TSK, TSK. Shu Qiong wore an expression of envy. Both he and Tang Kai were only king tiers, so it would be incredibly difficult for them to become celestial kings. Moreover, if it weren't for the fact that this was a transcendent dimension, it would be completely impossible for king tiers to become celestial kings based on their own effort alone. As Doka walked around, he continued to cause commotion among those in the surroundings. They all expressed their eagerness, and some stand owners even allowed him to choose some of their items for free. However, Doka didn't take any of their goods. He was a celestial king, so very few things could grab his attention. Ling Han retracted his gaze. There was no need for him to care about a measly monarch tier. He continued to scan the goods. After arriving at the next stand, he rested his gaze on a cauldron. This cauldron was extremely old and damaged, and it was more so covered in dust. If it were tossed on the street, it was very likely that no one would pick it up. Ling Han didn't notice anything strange about this cauldron. Instead, he was simply surprised that it had been put here for sale. It wasn't genuinely a broken cauldron, was it? He picked it up and examined it carefully. The stand owner was a middle-aged man, and he simply glanced at Ling Han without stopping him. He said, I discovered this cauldron in an ancient tomb. It's extremely sturdy. Ling Han smiled, and said, then can I give it a hard smack? Sure, the middle-aged man said with a nod. Smack it as hard as you want. If you truly manage to break it, I won't ask for compensation. All right then, Ling Han said with a nod. He then smacked the cauldron. There was a dull thud, yet the cauldron didn't vibrate at all. Interesting. Ling Han could sense that this cauldron hadn't been forged from divine metal. After all, divine metal possessed a peculiar aura that was similar to that of a celestial king. However, this cauldron seemed dull and lifeless, completely lacking the lively and noble aura of divine metal. Regardless, just its sturdiness alone was a sign of its extraordinary nature. Can I use this as a pill refinement cauldron? Ling Han mulled over this. Pill refinement cauldrons needed to be sturdy and immune to fire. Just as he was about to speak, commotion suddenly erupted again in front of them. They've started fighting. Tang Kai exclaimed in excitement. It's Doka and Yang Jixuan. It seems like they both set their sights on an ancient item, yet neither side was willing to yield to the other. In the end, they started fighting. Gasp. Yang Jixuan. Shu Qiong said with a sharp inhale. Yang Jixuan? Is he also a disciple? Ling Han asked casually. No, he's not a disciple. He's only a follower, Tang Kai replied with a shake of his head. He wore a solemn expression. Only a follower? What's so impressive about that? He's the follower of Lord Heavenborn, Shu Qiong added. Both his tone and expression were filled with respect and apprehension. Ling Han's heart involuntarily jolted. Heavenborn. Yang Zhixuan is a celestial king himself, and is more so a second heaven celestial king. No matter where he is, will he not be a renowned individual? However, he was still willing to become Lord Heavenborn's follower, Tang Kai said, chiming in where Shu Qiong left off. You definitely can't underestimate Yang Zhixuan. Of course, Lord Heavenborn is naturally even more terrifying than him. He was actually able to obtain a celestial king as a loyal follower, Shi Qiong said in admiration. Indeed, celestial kings would be mighty elites no matter where they went. Yet, this person was actually willing to become someone's follower. This was definitely a huge piece of news that further highlighted the freakish power of Heavenborn. I'm heading over to spectate the battle, the stand owner said, snatching the cauldron back from Ling Han. He then placed all of his items into a spatial god tool before immediately squeezing his way forward. Since this was the case, Ling Han also went over with the others to catch a glimpse of the battle. Chapter 25:11 Reappearance of Battle Armor. Chapter 25:11 Reappearance of Battle Armor. However, as Ling Han and the others ran forward, many more people were retreating, with their faces as pale as a sheet. This was because the two celestial kings had already started to clash. Most of the people here were at the ascending origin tier, while some of them hadn't even reached this level yet. Thus, just a small shock wave from this battle could end their lives. Fortunately, the two celestial kings quickly took their battle into the sky. Boom, boom, boom. Deafening thuds continued to travel over from the sky. Most people couldn't see the battle at all, and they could only tell that the battle was extremely intense. However, Ling Han could see everything clearly. Doka was a blonde man with a hooked nose and sunken blue eyes. He was tall and sturdy, and he was extremely skilled with his legs. With a single kick, he could unleash the power of the regulations of water, triggering a boundless tidal surge. Meanwhile, Yang Zhixuan had black hair and black eyes, and his figure wasn't especially sturdy. Instead, he was tall and slender, and he wore a cold and aloof expression. He continued to lash out with his palms, easily slicing apart the tidal waves unleashed by his opponent. He was completely unafraid of this disciple from the world's paramount martial academy. Both the celestial kings were extremely powerful, exchanging blow after blow. They both wanted to suppress their opponent. However, the fact that Doka was a proper disciple while Yang Zhixuan was only a follower signified that there was indeed a gap in their aptitude. Doka was naturally more powerful. Thus, in a battle at the same cultivation level, it was naturally the person who was more talented who would achieve victory. This was without a doubt. Even though Doka had only just advanced to the second heaven, he was a monarch tier, so his vitality index had directly soared to 6,600. Meanwhile, even though Yang Zhixuan had already reached the peak stage of the second heaven long ago, his vitality index was only around 6,500. Perhaps it was slightly higher than this, but it was definitely not as high as Doka's. After battling for several hours, it was clear that Yang Zhixuan had fallen into a disadvantage. Yang Zhixuan is about to lose, someone remarked calmly. This was one of the few people who could observe the battle in the sky. Their remark triggered many questions from those in the surroundings. After all, they couldn't see anything, and were simply here for the atmosphere. The person gave a brief description of the battle, and this caused many people to sigh with emotion. This is inevitable. After all, Lord Doka is a genuine disciple. Even though Lord Yang is also a celestial king, he's limited by his aptitude, after all. Against someone at the same cultivation level, he can only do so much. Moreover, Lord Doka has only just advanced to the second heaven. Once he reaches the peak stage of the second heaven, Lord Yang will definitely be defeated within 100 exchanges. He's a monarch tier, after all. How many of them exist in the entire world? Meanwhile, Ling Han was simply here to enjoy the show. He also nodded in his mind upon hearing everyone's remarks. Unless Yang Zhixuan had some trump card, he would definitely suffer a brutal defeat. Wang. There was a flash of purple, and it was as if another sun had materialized in the sky. Ling Han couldn't help but feel astonished. He had just thought about Yang Jishuan needing a trump card, and in the next moment, the other party had immediately unleashed a trump card. Right now, Yang Jishuan was covered in a suit of purple armor. However, this armor was far thicker and heavier than what Ling Han expected. Yang Jishuan was originally only half a head taller than most ordinary people, yet he was more than 3 meters tall right now. From this fact alone, one could imagine just how thick and sturdy his armor was. Ling Han was slightly astonished. Even though this suit of armor was extremely thick, it still appeared elegant and streamlined, with its surface polished and smooth. Moreover, it was decorated with numerous symbols that pulsated with the might of celestial kings. A thought suddenly flashed through Ling Han's mind. How unexpected. You actually possess a suit of battle? Armor 1. Doka's expression became solemn and serious. This type of armor was no ordinary armor. Instead, it was a powerful supportive tool produced by some dimension that had taken a scientific route of evolution. Battle armor was divided into several different tiers and types, with some targeting those at the Shattering Void tier, some targeting those at the Genesis tier, some targeting those at the Celestial King tier, and so on. When a Celestial King wore such armor, they could increase their battle prowess by a significant amount. Millimeter HM, an extremely significant amount. However, Celestial King tier battle armor was extremely expensive, and the cost of maintaining it was also exorbitant. Thus, it was extremely difficult for Celestial Kings to possess such armor. Upon wearing this battle armor, both the battle prowess and defensive ability of Yang Jishuan would soar to a new height. Perhaps he could rival or even surpass Doka. Of course, this was dependent on the battle armor's grade and also its affinity with Yang Jishuan. There's still time for you to fuck off, Yang Jishuan said in a haughty manner. Even though Doka was a disciple, and Yang Jishuan was only a follower, the Academy's rules stated that it wouldn't interfere as long as the cultivation levels of both parties were within 2 minor levels. Both sides could fight to their heart's content, as long as the battle didn't result in death. Thus, the Academy wouldn't interfere or punish him even if he smashed Doka into a pulp. Moreover, a proper disciple failing to defeat a measly follower? Would he have the face to complain to the Academy? Doka chuckled coldly. He had also experienced countless struggles and obstacles on his way to finally becoming a Celestial King. If he retreated in the face of a challenge, would he still have the face to refer to himself as a monarch tier? Trash who can only rely on external power, see how I dispose of you, he roared as his aura of haughtiness also soared into the sky. Boom. The two powerful Celestial Kings clashed again. Yang Jishuan's battle armor shone with brilliance, and it was as if he had transformed into an orb of purple light. In fact, even his attacks were completely different from before. They carried a purple radiance that possessed an astonishing destructive ability. Ling Han involuntarily clicked his tongue in wonder. The Dark Inverse Realm also possessed battle armor, and it had even created a war soldier like Wally. It was extremely impressive. By the looks of it, this kind of dimension wasn't rare in the Genesis world. In fact, battle armor was quite common and prevalent, especially since it provided the user with impressive supportive capabilities. It could increase both one's offensive capability and defensive capability at the same time. Ling Han could see clearly, and it was obvious that this suit of battle armor hadn't been forged from divine metal. Instead, it was forged from something equivalent to the Celestial Realm's 9-star or 10-star pseudo-divine metal. It could endure several attacks from Celestial Kings, yet in the end, it would still be shattered. However, this purple battle armor surprisingly possessed a powerful regenerative ability. After receiving damage, it would immediately repair itself and become as good as new. It was as if it had never suffered any damage. This was a detestable quality that prevented Doka from threatening Yang Jishuan. Ling Han pondered over the ways to destroy this battle armor in his mind. Firstly, one could use formidable strength to directly obliterate it, not giving it the opportunity to regenerate. Secondly, one could slowly exhaust its power. Once the battle armor was exhausted of all its power, it naturally wouldn't be able to regenerate anymore. However, Doka didn't possess the power to directly obliterate the battle armor. Moreover, after wearing the battle armor, Yang Zhishuan's battle prowess also became superior to his, so how could he possibly exhaust the battle armor's power? It wasn't long before Yang Zhishuan gained the upper hand, completely suppressing Doka. Another hour passed, and Doka finally let out an enraged roar as he turned around to flee, leaving a brilliant trail of light in the sky. Yang Zhishuan stood tall and proud. Even though he had relied on external power to defeat Doka, being able to defeat a proper disciple as a follower was already something to be proud of. This was an achievement of great glory. He put away his battle armor and descended to the ground, instantly winning countless gazes of respect and reverence. In this world, winners were grinners. Following the conclusion of the battle, the gathered cultivators naturally dispersed as well. Some returned to sell goods at their stands, while others continued to stroll around and look for things to buy. If there comes a day when I can also possess such cultivation and power, and when I can also engage in such an impressive battle before everyone, just how amazing will that be? Tang Kai said with emotion. His face was filled with yearning. Shu Qiong roared with laughter. You'll be the person who was defeated. Pay. Tang Kai spat upon hearing this. However, he quickly sighed with emotion again, saying, if I can become a celestial king, what does it matter even if I'm ruthlessly defeated before everyone? I still yearn to become one. Chapter 25:12 Forceful Purchase. Chapter 25:12 Forceful Purchase. To most people, the celestial king tier was in sight but unreachable. Thus, it was every person's dream to reach this lofty height. Shu Qiong also wore an expression of yearning. He completely agreed with Tang Kai's words, so he didn't continue to tease his friend. Ling Han chuckled and said, as long as you put in the effort, perhaps there'll be a sliver of hope. TSK, what cultivation level are you at? Yet you're actually trying to console us? Shu Qiong and Tang Kai playfully chided. They both recovered back to their jovial selves. If Ling Han wanted to, he could give both of them a celestial king pill, allowing them to immediately become celestial kings. However, they would be forever stuck at this level, with no chance to ever grow stronger. Besides, he had left all of his celestial king pills in the celestial realm. Moreover, he wasn't that generous, either. These two people were not yet his friends, and Ling Han was more so not a stupidly nice person. He involuntarily thought to himself, just how good would business be if he sold celestial king pills here? However, did a celestial path exist here? If a celestial path didn't exist, how would he obtain celestial seeds? If he couldn't obtain celestial seeds, how would he refine celestial king pills? Forget about it, there was no point thinking about this anymore. He returned to the stand that he had been at before, picking up the cauldron, and asking, what's the price for this item? 100 million starstones, the middle-aged man said. At the same time, he even raised a single finger to stress his point. You might as well rob someone. Tang Kai exclaimed in anger. This cauldron didn't exude any might, and what use was its stupid sturdiness? Perhaps they would use it to smack someone? If you want to buy it, then that's the price. I'm not forcing you to buy it, am I? The middle-aged man said with a chuckle. He turned his gaze away from Tang Kai, and it was as if he viewed him with complete disdain. You're angering me to death, Tang Kai shouted. Ling Han didn't have so many starstones with him. He pondered for a moment before saying, I don't have so many starstones on me. However, look at this item. Do you need it? He retrieved a fire element crystal, handing it over to the middle-aged man. The man didn't take him seriously, and this was mainly because Ling Han's cultivation level was far too low. What valuable items could he possess? However, he immediately screamed in pain upon accepting the fire element crystal. In fact, he almost threw it away. It was hot, far too hot. What are you doing? If you break it, can you afford the compensation? Tang Kai chided. He immediately seized this opportunity to berate the middle-aged man. He then bent down to pick the crystal up. However, he involuntarily yelped upon picking it up. Pa! The crystal was dropped to the ground again. PFF. Shu Qiong burst into laughter. Say, Brother Tang, is there any need to tease others like this? You even copied him dropping the item. This is Brother Ling's item, so how will you compensate him if you truly break it? He bent down to pick the crystal up. However, he immediately exclaimed in astonishment upon touching the crystal. Even his face became green. It was far too hot. Was that still a crystal? It was clearly the essence of fire. The middle-aged man finally came to his senses. He wore a serious expression as he walked out from behind his stand. He reached over with his right hand, yet this time, there was a layer of regulations around his hand. He then grabbed the crystal. An expression of wild delight instantly spread across his face. Is this a concentrated crystal of the regulations of fire? It possesses the terrifying great Tao of fire within it. If I obtain enough of such crystals, I might even be able to comprehend the complete great Tao of fire and advance to the celestial king tier. Tang Kai and Shu Qiong were both astonished upon hearing this. This scalding hot crystal was actually this impressive? They exchanged a glance before shaking their heads. One of them practiced the regulations of wood, while one of them practiced the regulations of earth. Both of these had nothing to do with the regulations of fire. Heh! You retrieved it with your hand just then, so why wasn't your hand burned? Tang Kai suddenly exclaimed. He was no fool, and he immediately noticed this problem. He looked at Ling Han in astonishment. Shu Qiong was also astounded. He hurriedly grabbed Ling Han's hand, spreading it open to observe. It was as smooth as jade. Where were the burn marks? How strange. He hurriedly grabbed Ling Han's other hand. However, it was also uninjured. Even the middle-aged man clicked his tongue in wonder. They had all examined the might of this crystal, and they discovered that it was difficult to hold it even with the power of regulations wrapped around their hands. They could still feel the devastating heat of the crystal, and it was only just barely manageable. With such a lowly cultivation, how had Ling Han managed to hold this crystal with no problems at all? Ling Han smiled, and said, "Perhaps my skin is thick and tough." This was the blatant truth. His physique was at the second heaven. Moreover, this crystal had only been refined from the earth fire, so its might naturally wasn't comparable to that of origin fire. As such, he could handle it with ease. How many of these crystals do you have? The middle-aged man asked. He was extremely enticed by these crystals, so much so that he couldn't be bothered figuring out why Ling Han hadn't been burned. After all, many things in this world couldn't be explained. 10, Ling Han replied. He naturally possessed more than 10, but wasn't business all about haggling? He wasn't running a charity, after all. The middle-aged man hesitated upon hearing this. He had found this cauldron in an ancient tomb that was most likely several epochs old. He knew this because he had asked someone to appraise some other items for him, allowing him to determine the age of the tomb. He was adamant that this cauldron was special, and it was because of this that he had priced it at 100 million star stones. However, he couldn't list any redeeming quality of this cauldron apart from its sturdy nature. As such, he didn't have the confidence to haggle. So be it, he would take 10 of these crystals. He didn't want to wait any longer. He gritted his teeth, nodding, and said, "All right, deal." Wait. Right at this moment, a large hand suddenly reached over, grabbing at the cauldron. While they were haggling just then, the middle-aged man had also taken the cauldron back. He was completely unprepared at this moment, and the cauldron was just about to be taken by that person. Peng. However, Ling Han suddenly launched a kick, striking the middle-aged man. A burst of power surged over, causing his body to involuntarily contort. At the same time, the cauldron just swung out of reach of the large hand. The person who had reached over was astonished. The middle-aged man had contorted in an extremely clever manner, actually causing him to miss. This was absolutely incredible. Lord Yang Zhixuan. Tang Kai and Shu Qiong both exclaimed in astonishment. The person who had interfered was actually Yang Zhixuan. Yang Zhixuan had also felt a sudden urge when he saw the cauldron. He also couldn't identify anything special about the cauldron, but since he had felt a sudden urge, he had to buy it to investigate no matter what. "Hand it over," he said in a deep voice, with his might as a celestial king booming through the surroundings. The middle-aged man involuntarily shuddered. "But Lord, I've already sold the cauldron to him," he said as he pointed to Ling Han. He didn't give in after being frightened. He still maintained his integrity. Yang Zhishuan peered down at Ling Han, his eyes full of disdain. Such a measly person dared to compete with him? What a hilarious joke. He frowned, and said, "How many starstones?" "I'll pay double." The middle-aged man hesitated upon hearing this. In reality, he was in greater need of the fire element crystals. After all, these crystals would give him a sliver of hope to reach the celestial king tier. Ling Han humphed, and said, "If you had arrived earlier, you could have competed fairly, with the highest bidder obtaining the cauldron. However, we've already settled on a price and made a deal, yet you still insist on forcefully purchasing the item. You're showing such wanton disregard for the rules." Xu Qiong and Tang Kai instantly went pale upon hearing this. That was Yang Zhishuan. To say nothing of his identity as a follower of Heavenborn, he was still a mighty celestial king. In fact, he had just defeated a proper disciple who was a second heaven celestial king. If one talked back to him, one would definitely suffer a tragic end. Chapter 25:13, Tearing Apart a Battle Armor with Bare Hands Ed. Chapter 25:13, Tearing Apart a Battle Armor with Bare Hands. Yang Zhishuan also hadn't imagined that Ling Han would dare to talk back to him. He faltered for a brief moment before coming to his senses. However, he wasn't enraged. After all, did a mighty celestial king need to take the words of such a measly person to heart? He could simply end the conversation by smacking them to death, couldn't he? However, such naive youths were truly rare to come across. He was slightly intrigued, and he said, "Brat, do you not understand that might is right in this world? My cultivation is far superior to yours, so much so that I can squish you to death with a single finger. Are you not afraid?" Ling Han laughed as he raised his right hand, clenching it into a fist. "I can also smash you to death with a single punch. Do you believe me?" Yang Zhishuan faltered upon hearing this. He then burst into loud laughter. Where in the world had this naive youth come from? What an extremely fun person. It was because of this that he hadn't developed killing intent, either. However, a thought suddenly occurred to him, and he immediately summoned a sword that pierced at Ling Han. He simply wanted to make Ling Han suffer a little and teach him a lesson. Wang. The tip of the sword immediately reached Ling Han's chest. Ling Han immediately lashed out. Peng. His fist smashed into the tip of the sword, instantly causing the sword to shatter. Before Yang Zhishuan could even react, Ling Han's fist continued to surge forward. Peng. The fist smashed into Yang Zhishuan's chin. A person instantly soared into the sky, quickly transforming into a small black dot. "What's going on?" someone asked. There were naturally spectators around them, and these people couldn't help but grimace. They all wore stupefied expressions. Where was Yang Zhishuan? Why had he suddenly run away? Even if they were beaten to death, they would still refuse to believe that he had been sent flying by Ling Han's punch. Even Xu Qiong and Tang Kai didn't believe this. With their vision, they naturally couldn't have seen the exchange anyway. After all, even Yang Zhishuan hadn't had the time to react. That being the case, how could measly ascending origin tier cultivators have hoped to catch Ling Han's movement? Thus, they all believed that Yang Zhishuan had left by himself. Perhaps, something urgent had suddenly come up. TSK. This celestial king was truly a benevolent person. Even though he had left for an urgent matter, he could have still smacked Ling Han to death with a single palm. Killing him would have been as easy as killing a fly. However, he hadn't done that. Just how benevolent was he? How detestable. However, just as they were all praising him, a loud roar suddenly traveled over. Yang Zhishuan appeared before them again. He was striding through the air, and there was a clear lump on his chin. There was also blood seeping from the corners of his mouth, and when he opened it to speak, it was also clear that he had lost several teeth. What's going on? Perhaps Yang Zhishuan hurried away to fight someone else just then? But the battle was so quick that his already finished. Anyhow, whom is he roaring at? Ling Han ignored him. He had initially wanted to smash Yang Zhishuan to death with a single punch. However, since Yang Zhishuan hadn't attacked him with killing intent, he also decided to show some mercy. He simply gave him a lesson. After all, there was indeed no great animosity between them. He retrieved another 9 fire element crystals, and handed them to the middle-aged man. He then grabbed the cauldron, and placed it in his spatial celestial tool. I truly underestimated you. You're a wolf in sheep's clothing. Very well, Yang Zhishuan said in a baleful voice. He had truly been far too reckless. It was because of this that he had been struck by Ling Han. At the very least, this was what he believed. What? Everyone went numb with shock upon hearing this. Yang Zhishuan's wound had been caused by Ling Han? Otherwise, why had he said that? However, how was this possible? What was Ling Han's cultivation level? If he could send a celestial king flying with a single punch, wouldn't the entire cultivation system be upheaved? Only at this moment did Ling Han glance up at Yang Zhishuan, saying, if you want to speak, then come down to speak. Do you not know that this is extremely disrespectful? Yang Zhishuan was enraged upon hearing this. He was being disrespectful? And the punch just then was respectful? His expression was baleful, and he said, into the sky for a battle. There were far too many passers-by here, so even though it would be fine to kill a few, wreaking too much havoc would definitely invite punishment from the higher-level celestial kings. Ling Han frowned and said, you still haven't learned your lesson? Enough with the nonsense. Yang Zhishuan roared. Peng. Ling Han bent his knees and launched up using his explosive leg power, not relying on the power of regulations at all. Even though he was simply using brute strength, his speed was still astonishing. He couldn't fly using the power of regulations, since he only possessed the power of regulations at the dividing soul tier. As such, his flying speed would be as slow as a snail. If he fought like this, could he ever hope to hit his opponent? However, the speed of his jump was insane, and he arrived before Yang Zhishuan in a flash. He then threw another punch. Shoo! Yang Zhishuan was sent flying again. Boom! There was a deafening boom as Ling Han landed back on the ground. His violent landing created a huge crater, and it also unleashed a massive shockwave that sent the people in the surroundings sprawling. Everyone was transfixed with shock upon seeing this. Even though they hadn't seen the situation clearly, it was without a doubt that Yang Zhishuan had been sent flying again. Moreover, the culprit was none other than Ling Han. Gasp! Holy Mother of God! Xu Qiong and Tang Kai were both numb with shock. They were more so overcome with an indescribable feeling. Thinking back, they had still been referring to Ling Han as a friend and brother. In fact, they had even teased him before. However, as it turned out, Ling Han hadn't lied to them at all. They had actually been treated as equals while messing around with such a person. Who would believe this? Ah! Yang Zhishuan flew back again, with his face comprehensively ruined now. It was filled with blood, and he appeared both ferocious and disheveled. He stared daggers at Ling Han, and his eyes were filled with raging fury. This was utter humiliation. Utter humiliation. Just then, he had defeated Doka in battle, greatly elevating his reputation and standing. After all, he had defeated a proper disciple as a follower. Now, however, he had been sent flying twice by an unknown brat who wasn't even a celestial king. These were the great ups and downs of life. It was truly a stimulating spectacle. However, this second punch finally allowed him to recognize the strength of Ling Han. He couldn't have avoided these punches by simply being careful. He humphed as he summoned his battle armor again, completely covering himself up. This instantly filled him with confidence and self-belief. With the protection of the battle armor, he was already standing in a position of definite victory. Do you dare to battle me? He roared. Ling Han was like a delighted predator seeing his prey. He indeed wanted to test out the strength of this battle armor. He wanted to see how many of his punches it could withstand. Peng! He unleashed his explosive power again, shooting into the sky. Yang Zhishuan couldn't react at all, and a forceful fist had already slammed into his chest. Under the powerful force of the punch, The symbols on the battle armor all lit up, forming a layer of light on the surface of the armor. This layer of light was a powerful defensive mechanism. Indeed, this was the first defensive line of the battle armor. However, the formidable power of the punch instantly shattered this layer of light, ripping through its defenses. Meanwhile, the punch continued to surge forward. If time were slowed down 10,000-fold, one would be able to see the armor denting inward, forming a deep crater that was eventually unable to resist the stress. In the end, the armor completely collapsed and shattered. Just as Ling Han had predicted before, as long as one's power was formidable enough to surpass the limit of the battle armor's regenerative ability, they would be completely capable of destroying it with brute strength. Ling Han unleashed a roar as he swung both his fists. Like a piece of thin cloth, the battle armor was instantly torn to shreds. Like a weak and defenseless young girl, Yang Jixuan stood there with his mouth wide agape, unable to make a single sound. Even though it was only his battle armor that had been torn apart, he felt as if it were his clothes that had been ripped off, completely exposing him to everyone. This was utterly humiliating. Beneath them, everyone was transfixed with utter shock. Tearing apart a suit of battle armor with his bare hands. Could he refrain from being so violent? Chapter 25:14 Change of Mind. Chapter 25:14 Change of Mind. Just then, they had all been speculating about Ling Han's strength. After all, none of them had caught the instance when Ling Han had sent Yang Jixuan flying. Now, however, the situation was completely different. They could all see the scenes in the sky clearly. Just how powerful was that suit of battle armor? Everyone was aware of this. After wearing it, Yang Jixuan could even defeat Doka, someone he couldn't rival with his own strength. This battle armor wasn't a celestial tool, yet it was only slightly inferior to celestial tools. It was incredibly rare and valuable. But now, someone had brutally ripped it to shreds with their bare hands. Fuck. Who could believe this? This was like a scene out of a legendary tale. Even though they were witnessing it with their own eyes, they could still barely believe what they were seeing. After tearing the battle armor to shreds, Ling Han couldn't help but shake his head. He had overestimated this suit of battle armor. He had initially thought that it was very sturdy, but as it turned out, it was only SOSO. It was only defensively powerful thanks to the symbols engraved on its surface, which allowed it to form a powerful defensive barrier of light. Of course, if one's strength couldn't suppress the battle armor by too much, it would indeed appear to be indestructible and invincible. Moreover, it could even regenerate itself. Ling Han smiled, and said, "Should we continue this battle?" Yang Jixuan instinctively shook his head. Even with the suit of battle armor, he had still been no match for Ling Han. Thus, what was the point of continuing the battle? Most importantly, Ling Han still appeared as if he were an extremely weak person. This contrast was far too great, and it was almost impossible to accept. Ling Han slowly descended from the sky. This wasn't on purpose. Rather, if he wanted to fly, he had to rely on the power of regulations. However, in terms of his mastery of the regulations, he was only at the dividing soul tier. Thus, this was the limit of his speed. Everyone was rendered speechless upon seeing this. No matter how they looked, Ling Han was only at the dividing soul tier. However, he had managed to defeat a mighty celestial king. Lord Ling. Tang Kai and Shu Qiong said in a reserved manner upon seeing Ling Han land as they walked over. This was a freakish person who could easily defeat a second heaven celestial king. Would they still dare to refer to Ling Han as a brother? Ling Han smiled in reply, yet he didn't say anything to console them. After all, his strength was indeed far superior to that of these two people. In a world where the hierarchy of power meant everything, it was indeed impossible for them to act as equals. It was fun hanging out with you guys. If you ever encounter any troubles in the future, you can come to the academy to find me, Ling Han said to them. Thank you, Lord. Tang Kai and Shu Qiong replied in delight. To say nothing of whether they could actually gain an audience with Ling Han in the future, just the fact that he had said this in public before so many people was already enough. This would act as a warning for other people. If they dared to target Tang Kai and Shu Qiong, they might possibly incur Ling Han's wrath. Ling Han nodded in reply. After this battle, he was confident that the Martial Academy would definitely send someone over to meet him. He left the marketplace, returning to the small village. He would wait for the people from the Martial Academy here. Since he was free anyway, he decided to put on a disguise and visit the tavern again. Right now, he was still extremely unfamiliar with the Martial Academy. While sitting around in the tavern, he heard the spirited discussions of many people. If we're talking about the most powerful new disciple of the Martial Academy, that's got to be Hua Furong, someone shouted after having one too many drinks. He was arguing with someone else, and he continued, according to rumors, she actually possesses an origin flame. Just this alone is already enough for her to crush celestial kings at the same level. Moreover, she's indescribably powerful to begin with, and I've heard that her evolution index is extremely close to 12. He was extremely loud, and his comments instantly caused the surrounding customers to reply with an "oh." Only a pitifully few people possessed an evolution index above 10, not to mention an evolution index of close to 12. I say, Ji Wuming is the most powerful, someone said in disagreement. In a short 1 million years, he's already soared from the first heaven to the third heaven. Who can compete with such progress? No, Lord Luanxing is the most powerful. There's no reason for this, other than the fact that Lord Luanxing is the most beautiful. Her beauty is unrivaled through the ages, someone shouted. This viewpoint won the support of many people. Everyone nodded in agreement. Even those who supported Hua Furong and Ji Wuming had to concede that she was indeed unbelievably beautiful. Ling Han smiled in his mind. His wife was indeed stunningly beautiful. Even he felt extremely smug about this. A grossly drunk person suddenly stood up and said, "No, no, no, even though these people are all very powerful, which of them can rival Lord Heavenborn?" The tavern instantly fell silent. That person's an absolute demon. Just because someone slandered him behind his back, he destroyed an entire city as revenge, someone said with a pale expression. But his talent is far too impressive. 2 heavenly venerates actually argued over the right to take him as a disciple. In fact, they even threw hands. Even as strong as Hua Furong is, she's only at the 3rd heaven. However, Lord Heavenborn is already at the 5th heaven. His cultivation speed is unrivaled in all ages. No one can compare to him. His strength had already far exceeded those at the same generation as him. In fact, only the older generation of prodigies can compare to him. For example, Amu. There's also Kan Yu. And Du Shi. The others also chimed in with several names. Each one of these prodigies was powerful enough to make heaven and earth lose its luster. These people have already reached the peak stage of the 9 heaven long ago, and they're only a single step away from reaching the heavenly venerable tier. All they need is a suitable opportunity. Everyone nodded in agreement. Heavenborn's power was far superior to those at the same cultivation level as him. I've heard rumors that the same dimension also produced another prodigy. In fact, Lord Zhuheng even left a dimensional transfer seal for him. Since he's regarded with such importance, he can't be much weaker than Lord Heavenborn, right? Someone suddenly said. Ling Han's ears immediately perked up. Were they not talking about him? Upon hearing this, the others instantly clicked their tongues in wonder. Zhuheng was a 6th-tier heavenly venerate, almost belonging to the strongest echelon of elites. His every action would attract the gaze of others. I've heard that he's already dead, someone else said in disdain. I've also heard that. He was enemies with Lord Heavenborn, and in the end, he was slain by Lord Heavenborn. To become enemies with Lord Heavenborn. He deserved to die. If he's alive, 1 million years have already passed, so why has he still not appeared? He's already a dead person. So what does it matter how astonishingly prodigious he was? All of that is worthless. Many people shook their heads, expressing their extreme disdain for Ling Han. Ling Han was extremely displeased upon seeing this. These people had never seen him before, so how could they possibly know that he was incapable? Heavenborn was indeed very powerful, but that was because he was the embodiment of the celestial realm. His physique was astounding, and he had also been tempered by fundamental power before. Thus, his battle prowess was naturally terrifying. However, all of this was because of his incredible birth. Moreover, one had to realize that the celestial realm was only a low-level dimension. In fact, it was a super low-level dimension. Thus, even though it had cheated and created an embodiment of itself, the growth of this person would definitely have a limit. At most, he could only become a second-tier heavenly venerate due to his background. Afterward, he would need to rely on himself and his opportunities to advance any further. If Ling Han wanted to suppress Heavenborn, he would need to possess an upper hand in terms of cultivation level. After reaching the heavenly venerable tier, however, Heavenborn's advantage due to his physique would also vanish. This was because divine metal couldn't withstand the destructive power of heavenly venerates. Ling Han was extremely confident in himself. Moreover, he would also cultivate the indestructible heaven scroll diligently, fighting to raise his physique to the level of divine metal as well. At that time, he wouldn't suffer a disadvantage when facing off against Heavenborn again. At this moment, a thought suddenly occurred to him. Before cultivating the indestructible heaven scroll to a pinnacle level, he definitely couldn't reveal his true identity. Otherwise, what would he do if he came across Heavenborn? Perhaps he could only flee. However, he didn't want to be on the back foot. Thus, concealing his identity was most likely the best choice. He silently stood up and left, not returning to the inn. Instead, he strode away from the village, directly setting off for the world's paramount martial academy. Chapter 25:15 9 Deaths Formation. Chapter 25:15 9 Deaths Formation. Ling Han arrived before the martial academy. While chatting with Tang Kai and Shu Chong before, he had learned that entering the martial academy was actually extremely simple. As long as one was powerful enough, they could enter the martial academy anytime they wanted. They only needed to do one thing: pass the 9 Deaths Formation. This formation sat at the gate of the martial academy, and as long as one managed to pass it, they would be able to enter the martial academy. At that time, someone would immediately come over to register them as a disciple of the martial academy. This formation was called the 9 Deaths Formation, and it consisted of 9 different levels in total, with each level being more difficult to pass than the previous. However, one only needed to pass the first level to enter the academy. There was no need to pass all 9 levels. It was said that the 9 Deaths Formation corresponded to the 9 heavens of the Celestial King tier. However, even 8th heaven Celestial Kings wouldn't necessarily be able to pass the first level of the 9 Deaths Formation. Why was this? This was because, in the first level of the 9 Deaths Formation, one's cultivation level would be suppressed to the first heaven. Thus, an advantage in cultivation level would be completely useless here. The 9 Deaths Formation was extremely difficult to pass. Moreover, even though the Empress and the others had been brought over by Zhu Heng, they had still needed to challenge the 9 Deaths Formation. This was the rule of the martial academy. If one couldn't pass this formation, they wouldn't be able to enter the martial academy. This was because the martial academy wouldn't give disciples free pass tokens or similar things. Each time they entered the academy, they would need to challenge this formation. If one couldn't pass this formation with their own abilities, would they have the face to enter the martial academy? The time it took for each person to pass the 9 Deaths Formation also varied greatly. The quicker one was, the better their result naturally was. Thus, there was also a ranking attached to this formation. It was said that only the most brilliant individuals could make it onto this ranking. The 9 Deaths Formation had already existed for several epochs. Thus, it had already been challenged by countless prodigies, many of whom had created great legends and legacies. As a result, trying to push into the rankings at this moment would be as difficult as trying to ascend the heavens. After all, this was equivalent to competing against countless prodigies from countless dimensions through countless generations. Each day, there would be many people challenging the formation, dreaming of entering the world's paramount martial academy. Becoming a disciple of this martial academy would be the greatest confirmation of their talent and the greatest glory they could experience. A man walked over and asked Ling Han, "Little brother, are you also here to challenge the formation?" There was a single ribbon of iridescent light around him. He was clearly a first heaven celestial king, yet he was wearing an amiable smile, and didn't appear haughty or arrogant at all. Ling Han nodded with a smile, replying, "Yes." The man was dressed in a green robe, and he looked to be around 30 years old. However, judging by his flame of life, he had already lived for at least several epochs. Thus, it wasn't demeaning for him to refer to Ling Han as little brother. The celestial king was extremely astonished upon hearing this reply. This was because Ling Han didn't look like a celestial king at all. Was he here to seek death? "Young friend, this is no place for you to muck around," another person said. This was a beautiful female celestial king. Ling Han smiled, and replied, "No worries, I know what I'm doing." "Haha, everything will be fine as long as you know what you're doing," another celestial king said. He was dressed in black, and he was exuding an extremely dark and cold aura. "Say, why are you people speaking so much nonsense with a young child?" a celestial king with an extremely large head yet extremely small body said. He wore an expression of impatience. "Just going off your courage alone, little friend, follow big sister, I'll definitely protect you," the female celestial king said with a smile. Her expression was seductive and alluring. Celestial kings should have all possessed steel-strong willpowers. However, upon seeing the smile of this female celestial king, the male celestial kings couldn't help but feel enticed. It was clear that she was skilled in the art of seduction and manipulation. Otherwise, she couldn't have wavered the celestial kings no matter how beautiful she was. Ling Han smiled indifferently, and said, "Sure." He entered the formation with the other celestial kings. Including him, there were 7 people in total. Of course, there were naturally celestial kings who had entered before them, and there would naturally be celestial kings who entered after them. The Martial Academy didn't care about how many times they challenged the formation. Even if someone failed 10,000 times, they could still become a disciple if they eventually passed the formation. Of course, if they had only passed due to luck, they would most likely fail to re-enter the Martial Academy if they ever went out. At that time, it would be extremely embarrassing and awkward. After entering the formation, the surroundings still appeared the same as before. It was as if the formation didn't exist at all, and everything was only a lie. However, the 6 celestial kings didn't dare to let their guard down at all. They had already challenged this formation several times, so they naturally understood it very well even though the formation would change slightly every time. Ling Han secretly observed his own body, discovering that there was no restriction placed upon him. His state was the same as before. According to rumors, one would have the chance to pass this formation as long as they were a first heaven celestial king. However, regardless of how freakish a first heaven celestial king was, their battle prowess could only reach the peak stage of the 3rd heaven at a maximum. Thus, with Ling Han's current strength at the 5th heaven, would he not be able to pass this formation with ease? Because of this, he was extremely calm at this moment. If he still couldn't pass this formation with such strength, would there still be reason in this world? He clasped his hands behind his back, appearing as relaxed as could be. "Humph, brat, even though friend Plumblossom is willing to help you, this doesn't mean that you're outstanding or whatnot. Quit pretending to be so relaxed and calm," the celestial king in black said in a cold voice. It was clear that he was slightly displeased. Fuck. They were moving around in such a cautious manner, yet Ling Han appeared as if he were taking a leisurely stroll. Was he treating them as bodyguards? They were bringing him over to expand his horizons, so he also had to fix up his attitude, no? The female celestial king glared at the celestial king in black, and said, "Why are you arguing with a child?" She was the Plum Blossom celestial king, and her beauty and fame were known far and wide. Countless celestial kings were trying to win her heart. The celestial king in black shut his mouth. However, there was a glimmer of killing intent in his eyes as he glanced at Ling Han. Ling Han indeed hadn't offended him. Whose fault was it that he was taking offense for no reason? Anyhow, finding an opportunity to kill Ling Han here would be far too easy. The latter had yet to reach the celestial king tier, so killing him would be as easy as squashing an ant. "Be careful, "It's about to begin," the Celestial King in green said. "Millimeter." Everyone nodded in acknowledgement. Even though the situation would be slightly different every time, the challenge would always begin around this area. The first battle was about to begin. Sure enough, after taking another step, 7 people suddenly appeared before them. Looking closely, these were 7 wooden puppets. They had no eyes, no ears, and no nose. Their bodies were also filled with symbols that radiated with overwhelming pressure. Wooden puppets could battle against celestial kings? Ling Han looked toward the celestial kings, only to see that their expressions were still calm. It was clear that this first wave of enemies wasn't powerful enough to trouble them. The battle began. Sure enough, the 7 wooden puppets all targeted a single person each. However, the 6 celestial kings teamed up to block all 7 of them. Without needing Ling Han to help, the 6 celestial kings quickly concluded the battle. Ling Han found this strange. If cooperation was allowed, wouldn't it be possible for powerful cultivators to bring weaker cultivators through the formation? After all, the Martial Academy had no rule against such cooperation. There was most likely some other mechanism to deal with this. They continued to push forward. The 6 celestial kings were extremely powerful when they teamed up, and they continued to brush through all challenges that they came across, not suffering a disadvantage even though they had to fight against 7 opponents. It wasn't long before they arrived in front of a foggy area. They all came to a halt. "Little friend, it's time for you to return," the Plum Blossom Celestial King said with a smile. "After entering here, each person has to fight for themselves, and it's impossible to help others. So, your adventure ends here." Ling Han simply replied with a smile. He naturally couldn't turn around and leave. Moreover, as it turned out, the true test only began here. "Let's go," the Celestial King in green said, stepping forward to enter the fog. They had only been willing to bring Ling Han over for this adventure because of a sudden impulse. However, they naturally didn't view him with much importance. The Celestial Kings entered the fog one by one, immediately vanishing from sight. Ling Han was just about to step forward, yet he unexpectedly saw someone walking back out from the fog. It was the Celestial King in black. There was killing intent on his face, and he didn't speak a single word as he swung his palm at Ling Han, aiming to kill this detestable insect. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.